again.
This is a country of possibilities.
There have been 46 presidents of the United States. Who will be next? Get the full story first on Sky News.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the CEO of Total Politics Group, Mark Wallace, and the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Soda. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. Welcome both. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. Well, the Express reports public fury over the government's attempts to solve the prisons crisis after ex-prisoners are seen celebrating their early release. The Metro has heard that a gang has put a bounty on the head of the firearms officer that killed Chris Caba. The Mayo leads on the same story and shares further details of Caba's past. The Guardian says police chiefs have since been appealing to Number 10 to make it harder to put officers on trial after the sergeant who killed him was acquitted. The Telegraph leads with the news that the most effective drug treatment for Alzheimer's will not be prescribed by the NHS due to cost. The Eye's front page praises the government's decision to launch an independent water commission and potentially give the current watchdog of what the axe. The FT shares details of a shake-up in the way HSBC is run following the appointment of a new chief executive. And the Daily Star pokes fun at internet trolls trying to prove that Joe Biden is an AI robot. And the reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Mark Wallace and Sonia Soda. Thank you both so much for being with us. OK, let's take a look at a story that is getting a lot of coverage. Let's just look at the Metro, pages 4 and 5. And this is, of course, Chris Caba, the killing. Now, the marksman who yesterday was found not guilty of his murder, but there's a lot of detail that came out today about Chris Caba's past. What have you made of the coverage, Sonia?
Well, the story's moved in a sort of number of different directions, and what this particular piece focuses on is actually what we now know about Chris Caba. So there were a number of reporting restrictions during the trial of Martin Blake, who was on trial for the murder of Chris Caba. He was an armed police officer. He's been found not guilty by a jury. But those because you've got to ensure there's a fair trial, the reporting restrictions meant that there was some information about Chris Caba that we, the public, and the jury themselves were not privy to. And actually, it is that he does have a track record. He's been in, he was in jail in the past for a number of violent crimes, including gun possession, for possessing a knife. And then a few days before he was killed by this Met police officer, he was actually involved in a shooting incident in Hackney, where he shot somebody in a busy venue and then pursued them outside of the venue, and you know, that man had an injured knee. And actually, some of the people who were with Chris Caba were put on trial for being there after Chris Caba was killed. So this is important. You know, it's important that information did not affect the trial. But it's important additional information that suggests that actually, you know, this police officer was making a judgment at the moment. You know, is this man a lethal danger to me and to other armed officers? And you know, he didn't have a weapon himself, but he was in a car, a 2-ton car, and he was ramming a police car. So it's not relevant to the trial, but it's new important information that's come to light that actually sort of suggests that, you know, the police officer in question was right to see this man as a threat.
Let's just point out, Mark, before coming to you, that actually Martin Blake didn't know that about him when he shot him. What he did know is that the vehicle that he was in was linked to a shooting the night before. So the jury didn't know, but in fairness, from what we understand, Martin Blake himself did not know when he shot him about his background. No, he didn't know, but it's relevant, I think, to us all coming to an assessment about whether that police officer, you know, was right to feel that in the circumstances.
And let's be honest, that's also something that, to some degree, however much of the information was available to the individual officer, the fact that this is a high-risk environment, high-responsibility environment for him, but a high-risk environment when you are dealing with a stop of a vehicle suspected in being involved with such a serious offence, and then, you know, that operation has been deemed so sufficiently serious for armed officers to be called on in the first place, that all helps to provide some context. This also provides really crucial context in a couple of other ways, I think. Firstly, because it's very important that these facts, confirmed facts about Chris Caba, are properly publicised, because throughout this process, there's been those things, for good reasons of due process, have been suppressed until now. That means I think there have been some misreadings of this situation in some of the coverage and certainly some of the commentary and campaigns that have happened around the case. And there have, in some cases, been some things that I think, frankly, now in this context seem like misrepresentations in the way people have described the context of this case. For me, it really underscores the fact that when you hear, in some cases, people, even now, after this information coming out, denouncing the way that this case has been handled, as if our system is grossly unfair, grossly biased, somehow complicit in the willful killing of a young man. actually, the fact that this information was kept from all of us for this time shows how punctiliously fair our system is when it comes to protecting due process in court. It would have been much, much easier for the defence. It would have been much, much easier if there was, as is alleged, a grand conspiracy of police and authorities against Chris Caba. It would have been much, much easier had this information been released before. But it wasn't, because they all do respect due process. So it's very important now that we see these facts and we put it in the full context.
Let's just look at another development on the story in the Daily Mail. Quite worrying, actually. So, front page of the Mail, and it reads, police officer who shot gangster has a price on his head, basically a bounty, I think, at £10,000. Very worrying development. Tell us what the Mail is saying.
Absolutely. So this is something that emerged from intelligence documents that were shown to the judge in the trial. So there are documents that suggest that a bounty of £10,000 was put on Martin Blake's head in exchange for information, for example, about his address. There was a huge amount of concern in the Met, and actually Ross McKibben, the Met's head of counter-terrorism, has said in the last today that in nearly 30 years of service, I've never been more concerned about the welfare of an officer or the likelihood of them or their family coming to serious harm as I am about the officer in this case. So that is something really serious. And, you know, there has been an extremely heightened sort of discourse around this case, as Mark's just said. And one of the reasons why it's heightened is that it is the fact that the Met has huge issues with institutional misogyny, institutional racism, institutional homophobia. And, you know, in recent months, we had a new report from Louise Casey that confirmed that. But that doesn't mean that every Met officer is going to be guilty of these things when something like this happens. I mean, obviously, there have been cases where there have been unlawful killings by the Met before, and where, you know, people have you know, stood for trial and the outcome has been different. But that doesn't mean that that's what happened in this case. And I think, you know, it's hard in an environment where there is low trust between the police and some communities in London. But one of the reasons why it's important to be so responsible and forensic in the way that we talk about things that are currently going through the judicial process is because you do get situations like this. And, you know, we've got to remember this is a police officer who's been found not guilty of the crime for which he was accused, who was doing his job. You know, it's a big responsibility to bear arms as a police officer, and you've got to make very difficult, snap judgments. And it's not acceptable that a serving police officer, regardless of what happened and what misconduct may or may not have taken place, has a bounty on their head.
Just let's bring in another development, because there really have been so many angles to the story. This on the front page of the Daily Telegraph. Officer who shot Caba may lose his job despite verdict. So, Mark, here he may still be charged with gross misconduct. Why?
Well, it almost seems cruel in a way after being dragged through this process. And as we've just learned, what's described as the highest harm street gang in Lambeth potentially being responsible for putting a price on the head of this officer for doing his job. It almost seems cruel that he might now be subject to disciplinary action. It is obviously the case, I think, in any organisation, in any walk of life, that it's possible to be found not guilty of a crime but still be responsible for some kind of breach of workplace rules. I think in the context of this, it's really, really important there's a proper investigation into how this came to trial in the first place, from my point of view. I think that process, were it me, should be put on hold until that's uncovered, because this was an officer who volunteered for this responsibility. He chose himself to take that responsibility on for all of us as a society. He and his colleagues were in harm's way, potentially at deadly risk. He took that decision that none of us, and none of the people sitting at home, unless there are any armed officers watching, have chosen to take that serious responsibility for the good of wider society. He's been dragged through this, he's been named, he's been put at personal risk. The idea that the police authorities could now double down on what was been the CPS's mistake, I think would seem extremely unfair. OK.
Mark, Sonia, stay with us. Coming up, prisoners are thanking Sir Keir Starmer for their early release. So is it bad optics for the government? We'll discuss that next.
So now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat is seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
This is going to be the biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
That's it got us then. There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits coming in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news.
Clearly not had very much to eat at all. A lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at her arms. I can put my entire hand round.
This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Mother Nature can be vicious, absolutely savage. The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa!
Close and personal with her, aren't they?
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me now, Mark Wallace and Sonia Soda. Right, let's go to the Daily Express now. On the front page, you know, when they say a picture speaks 1,000 words, I think you could pretty much say it for this. Talk us through the story and their angle.
Doesn't it just? I mean, I think this is the kind of story that a former boss of mine would have described as suboptimal for the government. This is the second wave of early release prisoners who've been let out before they would otherwise have been due to from prison, as the government continues to grapple with the prison overcrowding issue and the shortage of spaces. What's been really interesting, I think, is two things. First is it's effectively now an open secret that one of the reasons why this second wave has happened and happened on this scale is that the rate of recall, not necessarily reoffending, but licence breaches and being recalled to prison from the first wave of people who are out on early release has been extremely high. I think they're refusing to give the exact stats on that, but are acknowledging that it's large. The second thing is that yesterday the press was briefed that the government and prison service had told early release prisoners they had to be more responsible than the last lot and not put on a big show that would be embarrassing for the government. Obviously, that didn't reach Daniel Dowling-Brooks, reported to be a convicted armed kidnapper who posed in front of an extremely expensive car and announced "Big up to Keir," as you can see on the front of the Express, which I imagine Keir is not feeling hugely grateful for.
No, but he really should be saying big up to Rishi Sunak, because the reason why we've got these early prison releases is because the prisons are full and Labour arrived in government to find that, you know, this problem had not been dealt with. So, Labour won't be able to get away with saying that indefinitely, of course. Yeah. But I think in this situation, they can very fairly say this didn't happen on their watch. This, it was the last government that necessitated this. So, yeah, they should be saying big up Rishi Sunak.
I suppose it may surprise some people that a convicted armed kidnapper and robber is among the people that can be released, though.
Yeah, I mean, there are quite strict government regulations about it, actually. So I think it's non-violent offences under 4 years. I think it was originally. I'm not quite sure of the exact sort of stipulations around the second wave, but violent offences have definitely been taken out. But once you do the maths in terms of, it's people have to serve a minimum of half their sentence. This takes it down to 40%. So actually, you're talking about weeks of early release for most of these people, not months or years. So it's obviously not ideal, but they are people who would have been out in the community in 7 weeks or whatever it is anyway.
Yes, and I mean the fact is that this is, whenever it happens or whyever it happens, it's just never going to be an easy headline for the government. It is the case that this is not an issue that suddenly sprung up overnight. The government have a fair argument in that. However, while they tried their best, I think, this morning to pair this with announcing the Gawk review of sentencing, that's not really going to override pictures like this. I think there are some serious questions about quite how many of the people who were chosen for early release are now back inside. I mean, I chaired an event at Labour conference with retailers talking about retail crime, and even that was very shortly after the first wave, and we had a chap who runs a newsagent on our panel saying, I've had people out on early release within days of the scheme saying, I'm out on early release, I'm really sorry, I don't want to be committing a crime, but I have to steal for various reasons.
The problem is,
it happened immediately.
The probation is underfunded, and the problem is, if the prisons are full and you've literally just got to physically let some people out, you are going to be letting out some people who will reoffend.
It does seem surprising to me that this country was sufficiently good at setting up things like Nightingale hospitals, but Nightingale prison seems to be beyond us. I mean, that just seems beyond either party.
Yeah, because the last government. I mean, I understand it's because the security considerations are so great and the risk assessments you have to do. Because it's a massive community safety issue. Obviously, if you can't keep people properly locked up.
Put them on the high street, they're in the community straight away, aren't they?
Yeah.
Let's move on to another story. Speaking of funding, the Daily Telegraph about the NHS and an Alzheimer's wonder drug, which is now getting blocked because it is too expensive, Mark.
Well, actually, Sonia's done a lot of reading on this, haven't you?
Just before we came on, it's very nice of you to pass it over to me. But I think it's a very interesting story because it reveals some of the tensions in our system. So it is, it's a regulated drug, but what happens once a drug gets approved is that NICE, which is the body that looks at whether it's affordable for the NHS or not in terms of the quality of life improvement that it brings about, they will take a look at it and say, should it be prescribed on the NHS? Yeah. And I guess there are two issues with this drug. So the first thing to say is that it does achieve something significant. It doesn't reverse the effects of dementia, but it slows down cognitive decline. So doctors who are in favour of it say it can give somebody 2 months in their own home rather than a care home. So that's significant. But there's two things that count against it. It's really expensive, and I'm sure the price will come down over time. But secondly, it has to be administered through an IV every 4 weeks in a hospital. And actually, I've spoken to some experts who say if you gave this drug to everyone who could benefit from it, actually the NHS just doesn't have the capacity to administer it at the moment. So it's exciting, but there are all kinds of capacity and affordability issues with the NHS that we're struggling with at the moment.
Let's just sneak in one last story before we have to go. Front page of the Financial Times about training courses. EY staff fired as multitask culture leads them to do many online courses at once, trying to cheat the system and doing them simultaneously.
Allegedly so. I mean, this is EY Ignite Learning Week, where it seems that a check has taken place afterwards to see. Did everybody just take one course at once? Did some people take more than one course at once? Did some people maybe were so keen to learn that they took more courses than there was indeed time available to take? Yeah. And lo and behold, some have been sacked for taking multiple, which is why, obviously, Sonia and I are actually simultaneously reviewing the papers on several other broadcasters this evening. Just for efficiency, productivity.
But this story did make me chuckle a bit. I mean, obviously, it's serious for the people who've lost their jobs, but the consultants who sort of spoken out and said that this is really unfair, one of them said, But EY breeds a culture of multitasking, and I just think that's quite funny because obviously you can't watch 3 videos at the same time. But I do know people who do these training videos for work, and you know, you do have a tendency to sort of put them on in the background sometimes if they're not very good training while you're doing
That's the
something else.
hypothetical you.
Sonia.
Of course, that's a hypothetical me. Of course.
Sonia and Mark, thank you both so much. Now, coming up next on Sky News at 11, more on the details about Chris Caba's criminal past.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win. Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.